everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Sober in Seattle. I'm here today with Alan F., who
Hello.
has agreed to come down and talk to us. Um, so, Alan, when I heard you speak at the Seattle group, I don't know, it was a few months ago now, you had mentioned being an artist, painting. And that intrigued me because I am interested in hearing about people's experience with creativity and sobriety, maybe creativity before sobriety, what that would look like if that was a thing, because I know you got sober young. I don't know when you stumbled upon your creativity or what that life has been like for you. So I'm just really interested in hearing about that. I want to make sure that this microphone is working. Can you talk in there?
Hi, I'm Alan. I'm an alcoholic.
Oh, look at that.
All
Hi,
right,
Alan.
that
That's
works.
great. It does work.
Sure.
I mean, did you have much of a creative life before sobriety? I know you got sober young,
No,
like at
no,
16, right?
I didn't. I did not whatsoever. There's a certain, I think, aspect of my personality that lends itself. Like I was interested in music and percussion, maybe a little bit of drawing. As a kid, I never found typical boy things to be interesting, like army figures or like I just thought those. I usually wound up cutting them to pieces and trying to sometimes setting them on fire and trying to glue them together with heat. So their purpose, I never thought that football or other things that boys were encouraged to do, I didn't find interesting. Um, and that fact never really struck me as interesting or in itself or strange or different. I just was kind of facing a different direction, but I didn't do anything because I started drinking and other things by 12, probably earlier, but by 12 with definitive interest, and by 13 daily. So sipping coffee. So I was pretty much unplugged immediately. I got sober young. I was 16 when I got sober, slightly before my 17th birthday. So things went, dark quickly. I got into art a little bit in early sobriety because my mother is an artist and my grandmother's an artist, and so art sort of runs in the family a little bit. Nobody traditional. My mother is actually a brilliant artist, but never trained. She just decided to do it and taught herself, and she does amazing work. My grandmother, in her retirement, decided that she'd always wanted to be an artist, so she went to fine art school, got a master's degree in fine arts, and painted for 30 years. In her retirement, she lived to be pretty old. So there was no like traditional arts history in my family, but there's a lot of artists. Um, in my early 20s, I lived with a couple artists. I was interested in drawing, and I did learn some stuff. Like I did some very random, unorganized things. Like I bought some Bern Hogarth books and just like would copy everything that he drew and try to teach myself to draw that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I discovered eventually that the only reason I was doing that was to try to get girls. Like I wasn't actually interested. I was like, this will make me attractive. So I was pursuing it for this very sort of ulterior motive.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I got disgusted with myself for having the ulterior motive, and I quit altogether. After a few years, I just stopped because I didn't like the way I was doing it. Um, and then I never had plans to do art again. And what happened was one day, this was 2011, so this is 13 years ago. So I was 34. I had this thought. I don't know why the thought happened, and this thought I'm going to talk about is recurring. The nature of it's recurring. The content of the thought is different, but this event has happened several times.
Mm-hmm.
And the thought one day, it just came into my mind, what if I put watercolor inside of like the kind of polyurethane that you use to like lacquer furniture? And I don't know where the thought came from.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought I want to like a syringe and I want to inject watercolor paint into varnish. And I don't know why I thought that. I just did. I never actually did that precise like alchemical experiment. But the idea led me to trying to paint. And so how that happened. So I had the thought, and I just said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to obey the thought. I don't know where it comes from. I'm just going to do what the thought said to do. So I went forth, and somehow that turned into, I don't know how I found it, but it turned into epoxy, and a two-part epoxy resin. You can get stuff that's like industrial grade, where you are fixing boats, like you're epoxying broken sections of boats together, right?
Right.
And you can get like artists epoxy resin, which you get like at the art store, and it's a two-part epoxy, and you mix it together. And a lot of people will use it to like top coat their paintings. So it's this like 100-year non-decoloring or color safe
And it just
forever.
dries clear.
Yeah, dries clear.
Yeah.
But you can put whatever you want inside the resin.
Right.
So this idea of like injecting watercolor into varnish translated into straight oil paint into resin.
Okay.
So literally you have a cup. So if anybody's listening, you visualize like in 16 ounce, like one of those solo cups that like people do at like beer parties, right? Where you bring your own red cup to it.
Yeah.
Well, you get two-part epoxy resin. So one part hardener, one part resin, and you mix it together. And then literally a tube of oil paint, you just squirt a little in, but a very, very, very small amount, because the pigment will just spreads very nicely, right? Then you mix it up and you pour it onto a canvas, and then now you have this medium, which is glue that has color in it that responds to gravity. So you put it at 45 degrees and push it around with a hair dryer, and then layer it over and over and over again. And suddenly you have this medium where you can do these like weird sort of landscapes or, color fields.
Interesting. So is it raised then? I mean, it's
yeah,
That's
it can be very textured, and and some of the stuff I like the most that I've done is quite textured looking. From there, I bumped into metal paint. I was doing some work for my uncle. When I had no money, they'd hire me to do random crap around their house, like paint the house. So I'd go paint the house, and they said, we want this stuff here to be this bronze color, and we want you to use this paint. And the paint was Modern Masters, which is this brand, and they have metal in the paint, and I was very interested in that. So I bought some for myself, and then a teeny bit of that mixed in this resin winds up making this like sheen, right? So then you do the regular layers of different, hair dryer, different colors, pushing this resin around until finally it dries. And then the top coat is with this metal paint, which creates this sheen. So that was the next. And then I tried, well, what if we put this metal paint as the base instead of an oil base on the canvas? Let's use this metal. And then the metal doesn't interact. The metal paint interacts with alcohol very poorly. So if you put a dry pigment inside of alcohol and pour that onto the metal paint, it fights and creates this weird lattice of color mixing into the metal paint, and then resin on top of it. So it's really just experimenting with alchemy, right? And you have a new thought of what if you do this, then you just do it. What if I did that? Then you just do it, right? So the idea is borrowed from how I was taught to go to school. And how I was taught to go to school was, you have no outcome in mind. You go and you follow your intellectual curiosity. If you want to take a class, you take it. You don't think, why do I like that, or what is it good for? If there's something inside you that goes, what's that? You just believe that voice that has a question about it, right? So it's about believing your own intuition. Alcoholics are very good at having an intuitive sense and then double guessing it and saying, well, I don't know about that. What if this? And so then we don't believe our own intuitions.
Sure.
I see that constantly. So the way I was taught to go to school was believe your intuition. If you have an interest, just follow it, right? Because if God's will is about the outcome, then like go do it and see what happens. Like you don't know God's will until something actually transpires. You don't get to know it ahead of time. You know it after the fact.
Who taught you how to go to school like that?
My Uncle Dennis.
Okay.
Yeah, my Uncle Dennis. He's very intelligent. He told me just to not think about what the outcome was, to follow my curiosity. I just believed my curiosity was going to take me to the right place. And I did. And it worked. The most important thing I ever did in school was and this is sort of like the thought of, I want to squirt this watercolor into varnish, like where that thought came from. So when I was signing up, I went to Evergreen, right? Which is, there's not classes. You have one class for the whole year. For the audience, so Evergreen has one class for the whole year. It's a coordinated studies program, so instead of 3 classes per quarter, you have one class that covers the whole year. So it's a 48 credit class instead of like a 5 credit class.
Right.
I was I think it was my, I forget what year it was, but I was signing up either for like a computer science program, which was like a year-long computer science program, or an American history, American literature program. Now, I had done some computer work before going to college. So I kind of knew, like, I had done like some network operations work. I'd sort of kind of lied my way into some interesting jobs, saying I knew stuff that I didn't know, and then I'd learn how to do it real quick before the job started, right? So honesty has not been the foundation of my program, that's for sure. I've lied to get jobs many a time, but I learned some stuff. And so I had this idea of, if I do this computer science program, I have the kind of a realistic view of what happens if I do this course. I'll do this course, I'll do another course. I know that I'm more interested in like architecture than in development. So I'm probably going to become like a systems analyst, right? And like wind up dealing with, like, nowadays I'd be building instances of like cloud VMs across the scale to blah, blah, blah. And I thought, I don't want to do that, right? I get it, but there's this other class about American history, American literature. I don't have a fucking idea. Can I swear here?
Yes.
I don't have a fucking idea what happens to my life if I take this class. So it's a complete question mark. And that question mark forced me to take it. Like, I had to just go find out what that question mark was.
Mhm.
What that ultimately did was introduce me to William James, who was my hero. I would never have discovered William James to the degree that I did. He's mentioned in the big book, right?
Sure.
Like, you hear there's a line about William James.
Yeah.
And we know, like, oh, Bill read some book that Abby gave him about religion. And like, okay, so Bill really liked this book. That's kind of the depth that we get it, right?
Right.
So in this course, I was introduced to William James. And as a consequence, I read all of his philosophy. I read a lot of his psychology. I read about his life. I studied the time period. Like, he was friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Mhm.
There was a room in his house called the Emerson Room. And when Emerson was in town, that's where Emerson stayed, at James's house in the Emerson Room. It's like all these people knew each other, and they were building this type of thinking, whether it's like transcendentalism or pragmatism. They were all sort of building this stuff together, right? Very fascinating work. That led me to ultimately get a degree in philosophy and like Western analytic philosophy, which was incredibly useful. So that question mark, I would not be where I am in my life without having just decided to pursue that question mark. And I think actually that's kind of what art is. Art is the unknown. You just have to go. You don't get to know what comes out the other side, at least for me. Like, some artists really know, like, I studied this, I've done these things, I'm going to do this. And that's sort of like a larger programmatic sense for their life and an individual piece. It's very planned. My experience is not that at all. My experience is that I'm not in control of either my life or a piece of art when I do it. And afterwards, I look at it and go, oh, that's what it is. That's always been the case. I may have an idea of where I want to go with it and a feeling of I want to go this direction. And that's really about as much control as I have over what happens when I'm painting. I try to do different things. Some of my favorite pieces have come out of fits of anger, where I'm so pissed that the piece is failing that I put my hand on it and I shove all the paint off of it. And I'm screaming, shoving the paint off of the canvas, calling myself a piece of shit. I take a step back and look and go, oh, fuck, it's really good now. And I just stop, that it's done, right? I'm like, oh my God, it's gorgeous. And I don't know, why did that happen? I have no idea. I don't know. And other pieces I've done very intentionally, and like, it came out perfect and gorgeous. And I do the exact same thing again, and it's crap. So I don't know the process or why it happens this way, and I don't believe that I'm in control of it. The other thing that I was thinking about the nature of this call on the way over here, and I don't really think that art is inspiration. Sometimes we may feel inspired. I mean, I've done my best art. This is classically ridiculous, but in times of depression. Like, I had a relationship end that led to 2 years of a lot of good paintings,
Sure.
right? And it was like I was trying to express something, and really I was trying to express the nature of a higher power through painting. And for me, somehow that's connected to the planet, where there's artist named James Lavador, who I've been very moved by, and he just does landscapes. But the landscape is as if it's alive. So you see this landscape and you feel like the planet's alive. And I really wanted to express that too. It's something magical about that. So that's a lot of what my stuff was, and it just was an accident that that transpired. I forget the point of what I was. Oh, on the way here, thinking about what I wanted to talk about with you. Art is just work. It's just work. There's this sense that I had, this conception that like if I got into art seriously, something magical would happen, and I would get to find this button that was like the creative juices. I'm going to pour out some beauty button, and like the button doesn't exist. What there is I have to get up and walk to my table where all the materials are and just work. It's really simple. There isn't this sense of I'm doing something special and I'm doing something meaningful and I am finding some apotheosis. That's all sort of imaginary bullshit. What there is in reality is I have to walk across the room and start pouring paint on this canvas every day, no matter if I feel like it or not. So art is work, is what it is. It's work.
So I've heard you say a couple different things.
Yeah, they're all true and they're all lies. Yeah.
So you said it's just work, but you are not in control. So what is happening there? I mean, how can you?
I mean, every day we show up in our lives and we have to do things,
right.
And we have no fucking control at all.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
We put in the action and then we get to see what the results are. So the same way that like we talk about how to live sober, that's how we do art. For me anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm not in control of it, but I have to go do it.
Right. So you're like a channel of some sort of energy.
I don't know what I am. I don't know what I am.
Okay.
I cannot put words to that.
You just know what you're not.
In control.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Okay, good. So I have a question about being, I mean, I've struggled with creativity. So I'm wondering if, and I sort of have resigned to that maybe I might just be mediocre at a whole bunch of things, right?
Me too. High five.
Rather than like spectacular, like I'm not Bob Dylan, right? Or I'm not whatever. I don't know. Anybody else. But
do you want to be?
Well, I have an alcoholic tendency to want to be a rock star, but I don't know how to play a musical instrument, right? Like it's a thing that I have. So it's a little immature. So I want to mature into my creativity. I know that I'm artistically inclined. So I have to, there was this thing going around a few years ago about how you can be really good. You have to put 10,000 hours into.
That's not really true. Yeah, right, for some things it's less, for some things it's more. The 10,000 hour rule is just some BS that journalist, what was that guy's name?
I don't know.
He wrote the thing about hockey players.
It stuck with me. It's like, okay, but it goes along with it's work, right?
Yes.
Like, okay,
yes.
So you do have to put in some work, right? You're not just great at something immediately, right? You have to experiment. So like, are artists born, or are they made, or both? Or like I think it's both. I just don't know.
I think it's both.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the ones that aren't born can still be made.
Right.
Absolutely, 100%.
Right? Like if you're not,
I don't know. My perception, my belief on alcoholism is that you're born with it or you're not, and that's it.
You can't drink yourself into alcoholism.
No, I think if you drink yourself into alcoholism, you already had it. Right. People that don't have it aren't going to drink themselves into it. That's what I think.
Are more heavy drinkers than alcoholics.
Yeah, and I've seen them, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is terrible! I should stop," and then they stop.
Right.
I'm like, "What the hell is that?" No, you're supposed to try to kill yourself. That's the answer. Come on.
Over and over again.
So I switched to music. So I don't paint anymore. I switched to music.
Music.
Yeah. So I play flamenco now. So that's a couple years ago. Well, in the mid-pandemic, a year and a half ago. Again, I had this thought. I'm walking down the street, and I think I should play flamenco. I don't know why I thought that, but the next weekend I went to the store and I bought a guitar.
Okay.
I started looking at YouTube videos, started trying to learn something. And after a couple months, said, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I went online and I found a teacher in Berkeley, and we have online lessons now.
Mm-hmm.
I have ever since. His name is David. He's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the last year and a half, I've been playing music. And I think I've done a couple paintings, but it's just been entirely music. And music has taught me that the only way you become good is through practicing and practicing and
Right.
practicing. And you don't learn it and then are good at it.
Right.
You learn it because you ground it into your bones.
Right.
There's this YouTube channel called Two Set Violin, and they have a mythological mascot. So it's these two Asian kids. Well, they're adults. I shouldn't say kids, that live in Australia, Chinese descent, and they have a mascot named Ling Ling 40 Hours.
Mm-hmm.
And Ling Ling is this prodigy who is like 13 years old and like the best violinist ever. And the joke is that Ling Ling got that way because Ling Ling practices 40 hours every day. Right? And that's what it takes to be good at music, is to practice for 40 hours every day. So people that are intuitively very good, to become great, it's through practice.
Right.
And so trying to learn music has taught me that, like, no, it's through sweat.
Yeah.
You know? And so I play flamenco, right? Which is really hard to begin with. Like my intuition was like, pick the hardest thing you could learn. And so it's kind of silly. It's also the most beautiful.
Is it played on a classical guitar?
Yeah, it's a classical guitar that it's a little different. Like, so in classical guitars, there's like
nylon strings.
It's nylon, yeah.
Right.
Flamenco guitars are almost classical guitars. They're basically the same, but there's a couple differences in construction that make them a little more durable.
Okay.
Because flamenco is a very aggressive.
You're pounding on that.
Yeah. You're beating the crap out of the guitar.
Yeah.
And you want it to percuss very loudly.
Right.
So yeah.
Which harkens back to your percussion tendencies.
Yeah, there's a percussive element to it that's very nice. Like if you're gonna play flamenco, like you have to be very good at counting and having rhythm, right?
Yes.
So I forgot the point of where we're going. Oh, so there's this one. So flamenco is broken out into song types called palos, and they come typically from regions of southern Spain. One is called bulería, and it's a song type. Like the most popular one is Soleá. That's the mainstay of flamenco is Soleá. Soleá por bulería, fandango, tangos. There's a bunch of these different palos that are song types, and within the song type, you have 1,000 variations, right? Mm-hmm. So bulería is like the kind of popular, like fast, fun. You play it for like parties. People are dancing. So this one bulería that I was like, I need to learn bulería now. So my instructor said, okay, you want to learn Paco Pinos? Paco Pino is a very famous flamenco guitarist who was sort of like an ambassador from Spain. He wasn't. He was a musician that sort of became like de facto ambassador because everyone was like, oh, Paco's great. Come to our country and play music. So he kind of became this figurehead for Spain/music.
Right.
And he was an amazing composer. So my instructor was like, yeah, you want to play... No, I lied. Let's rewind at home, rewind 5 seconds. So getting Juan Serrano, and I learned on his bulerías, right? And this is 6 months ago that I learned how to play this particular bulería. 6 months later, I still play it every day, several times.
You should have brought your guitar.
And I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it.
All
right? I can play it. It sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
But then I listen to like a real flamenco player play it. I'm like, I'm nowhere near that good. There's so much nuance in flamenco that is so difficult to get right. You have to practice forever. So I've played this song hundreds and hundreds of times, and like, I'm okay at it. Mm-hmm. I'm all right at it. Mm-hmm. I'm not good at it. I'm okay at it. Mm-hmm. And that's what it takes. The best flamenco players ever spent their entire lives playing flamenco. Paco de Lucia is considered the best that ever lived. There's a bit of an argument there, but he is the wizard of flamenco. And at 12 years old, his dad said, no more money, no more school, go outside, play music, get money. So he started busking at age 12 full time. So he was playing full-time music from as a kid. And then in his middle age, he's like the best ever. So he hit 10,000 hours before he was 20,
Sure.
right? So this
Right.
going back to this 10,000 hour thing.
Right. But so I have two questions. First one is, well, how old are you?
47.
Do you feel like you're like it's too late to start this stuff? I mean, does that ever go through your mind?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The other thing I do
with
is
that thinking?
with that thinking is I have to try to live life on life's terms. I try to live the program, actually. I try to actually live it. And when that thinking occurs, life on life's terms says, well, the reality is you're 47, so you can do what you can do now. That's it. That's full statement, full stop. Wanting some alternative reality just makes me feel bad about myself, which I think is by its nature alcoholism. So when there's this thought of like, I should have started when I was 12. Can you imagine how good I'd be? Can you imagine? Can you imagine
No,
how good I would be?
Thought,
Yeah. All I do is feel bad. That's the only thing, right? So life on life's terms
Yes.
demands that I simply accept what the case is. And the case is I'm 47 and I want to do this thing. So I'm going to do it. There isn't an alternate reality to try to live.
So my second question is, so you're an artist and you have these outlets that you've experimented with, and I just want to know, like, and as a sober alcoholic, how important is it for you to explore your creativity? What would it, I mean, I know you earn a living not being creative, right? I mean,
sort of.
I mean, there may be some creative elements to your job, but you're not an artist.
No.
As a job.
No.
That's not your job.
Yeah.
So
my job doesn't make any sense. I don't know what I do every day anymore.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, so but that can be still kind of fun.
It's fun. Yeah.
So, but it sounds like there's some spontaneity, spontaneous elements to it, which might keep it entertaining.
I mean, things are constantly breaking. I have to figure out why. So I'm spontaneously trying to fix things.
All right.
Yeah. So that's fun.
But tell me about how important is it for you to explore your creativity and express your creativity, whether it's through painting or through flamenco? I mean, how important is that? What if you weren't doing that? What if you weren't doing that? What do you think the repercussions of that would be?
Honestly, I don't think they would be that big.
Okay.
I don't think they would be that big. Yeah. I think I would be doing something else.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd be reading more. I love reading.
Right.
And like, I don't read as much as I used to.
Right.
And like, I have a stack of books that I'm like, I really need to get those in my brain, Right. So if it wasn't, I would be doing other things. Right. And I don't think it would be that big a deal. I have surprisingly faith, and my position is that I'm going to be taken care of, and I don't feel like I need to do a particular thing to be taken care of. Taken care of. I don't know how to say that right.
Taken care of.
Yeah. So I don't think if I didn't do this, I don't think I'd lose anything. Yeah. I think I'd be doing other things.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think that there is a right way for me to live my life. I don't think there is. I mean, there is the when I ask what God's will is for me, the answer is not be an artist. The answer is live as much as you can and help everybody that you know. So I'm sort of exaggerating. I'm exaggerating that answer. But the answer isn't indulge in the things that I want.
Well, so, okay, so you're saying, though, that the universe or God or whatever has said, you put these thoughts in your mind to try this paint.
I believe that's true.
And then I need to play flamenco.
Yeah.
But
they could have been other thoughts.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, though, is essentially you would be, if you didn't do those things and explore those things or follow that intuition, then you would not be following what your interpretation of God's will for you is.
No, I wouldn't say that at all.
Okay.
There's probably a bunch of intuitive thoughts that I didn't recognize as intuitive that I ignored. Okay. So if that theory is correct, then I'm like my stock is way low right now, right? So I don't think that you can get it right or wrong. I think you can get it right or wrong by drinking again. Otherwise, I don't think there is. So I don't think there's a way to say like, I got this thought and I obeyed it and that was the right thing to do. I don't think that's the structure of that evaluation doesn't work for me.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, right or wrong is probably not a place to.
Because I just wind up losing if that's the case, right?
Yeah.
And for me, the premise of right or wrong is low self-esteem. The premise of right or wrong is I've decided I'm not good enough.
Mm.
And when I am good enough, right or wrong no longer matters, right? I'm just
Right.
doing whatever's happening. So the idea that I need to somehow get all this correct, I work really hard to recognize when I'm having that sort of structure in my evaluation and avoiding it. Because to me, it's just painful alcoholism. Yeah. I could have had that thought and been like, huh, how interesting. And gone into like a baseball game and never done anything about, and like that would have been a fine outcome. That would have been a totally legitimate outcome. Right. This interesting thought occurred to me and I did nothing with it. Whatever.
That describes probably every day.
Yeah.
In some form or another. So backing up just a little bit, to William James, which is fascinating to me because I've learned a little bit more about William James lately. And
everybody should.
And that he's so. What's the most? I think it's very fascinating. He was ahead of his time thinker, right? I mean, he was. I don't know much. Obviously, you know more about it, but it was interesting for me to learn that he struggled with his own addiction. Which I thought was fascinating. I've tried to read Varieties of Religious Experience.
It's a tough book to get through.
Man. And I was at I think it was at a thrift store or a bookstore, a used bookstore, and I picked up his works, right, his lectures, and with high aspirations, thinking that I was going to be able to read that, and I will, but I can take it in little bits and chunks. And so, tell me what the big takeaway from William James is for you, and how it affected Bill Wilson in particular with the philosophy within Alcoholics Anonymous.
There is no answer. Mm-hmm. That's the takeaway. Yeah. So for varieties. So what James was interested in, and I think that he was trying to resolve the fact that he didn't believe his father's religion. I think a lot of his work was about that, trying to get right with that fact. His dad was a theologian and James was like, doesn't work for me. And that created this massive internal conflict. And I think that a lot of his life is trying to resolve that conflict, much to our benefit.
Right.
The basic premise starts with this idea that there's a historical sort of notion in philosophy. And to make it simple, the notion is there is a thing out here in the world. Like here's this picture on the wall, right? And then there's a thing in my head, which is the picture in the wall. And the closer the thing in my head is to matching the thing on the wall, the more truth I have, right? So this is generally referred to as the correspondence theory of truth.
Which is subjective.
It wants to not be subjective. It wants to not be. It wants to say there's an ideal of truth, and what we need to do is get that ideal into our brains. And the better idea we have of that matching inside to outside, the idea in my head versus what's outside in reality, then the more truth I know, right? And James says that's total BS. Truth probably doesn't have an uppercase T to begin with. And what we know of as truth is the outcomes of something, right? So the outcome of an event, the outcome of an object, the consequence of these things, that's what we know about it, right? And that's ultimately what the thing's truth is. So if there's an event that takes place, the meaning and truth of that event is what comes from it. So instead of having this idea that truth pre-exists experience and the experience is about getting an equivalency with this pre-existing truth, he says, no, the experience itself creates the truth. And we only really know about it after the fact. So this is the basic idea of pragmatism, right? And we hear about it in politics a lot as well, of like, well, if we do X, then Y happens. And if we do U, then Z happens. And what is the outcome that is of greater benefit to us, right? So measuring a thing based on its outcome rather than like an ideological standpoint. Versus we might say, this is the religiously correct thing to do, so we must do that. What's the best outcome for this population? what's the outcome of it? So that's the very kind of rough draft version of pragmatism, right? But it has these much wider implications in terms of what does truth mean. And if pragmatism is true, then its idea of truth means that truth is different for every person, which is probably true. Or I should say, probably that matches observation. Maybe that's a better way of saying it.
Mhm.
It's also very empirical. So empiricism is the basic idea that we understand the world by going and looking at it, right? And rationalism says we understand the world by thinking about things and figuring out if X, then Y. So, like Descartes, probably the most famous rationalist, I think therefore I am, was like, if I remove all of my knowledge, I'm still thinking about removing all of my knowledge. So if I'm thinking, I must exist. And if I exist, then things are going to happen. So Descartes had this rational explanation for existing. And an empiricist would raise their hand up in the air and say, look, my hand's in the air, I must exist, right? So like there's these different ways of evaluating the world. And James was definitely said that the empiricists aren't even empirical enough. Like they haven't even gotten all the way there. So that was a lot. I'm sorry. That arrives at the point for William James writing religious experience, because he was taking this idea of pragmatism and going and looking at religious experience. And what he found was, I got Catholics, I have shaman, I have people that smoke dope and beat drums. There's all these different experiences with religion, and the outcome is somehow they get grace. They all have this experience that they describe, maybe not even totally similarly, but they're describing this thing of like relief from self, connection to something larger than themselves, and from that feeling okay about the world. So he describes these experiences they have as a result, not as an input. So he doesn't care what religion they are, what the experience is that leads into this result. What he realizes is that it's the result that matters. So you can't tell people they need to be Catholic, or they need to be Protestant, or they need to be a shaman, or they need to be Buddhist. Everyone just goes and does whatever, and then they get this result. And it's the result that actually matters in life. That's what matters. There's a cash value of experience on the ground. That's what actually is meaningful, not this ideology that's just somebody thought it up a long time ago. So Bill read that and was like, oh my God, I don't have to try to control what things are. People just get this experience based upon what they need, and everyone can sort of pick it. And then he also realized that alcoholics are a bunch of assholes. And if you try to tell them, you must believe X, they're going to say, well, Y is my middle finger. And they're going to leave, right? So he kind of got these various things from reading it. And I think that's why we wind up seeing a program that says, like, it's your higher power. It's whatever you think it is. Because it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is what happens to you when you try to believe. It's the outcome of that that's going to change your life. It doesn't matter what you believe in. And you'll probably never know anyways. Like higher powers, we can't comprehend it. It's higher power is we have no possibility of comprehending it anyways. It doesn't matter what the higher power is. What matters is that our internal orientation goes from everything is about me to maybe it's not about me. Maybe there's more than me that's important here. And like that positioning I can use to live my life, which is radical for an alcoholic. Yeah.
And necessary for,
I certainly think so.
Yeah, for any sort of quality of sobriety, I would imagine. So we've gone on almost 40 minutes.
I could do this for hours.
I know, I can tell.
Yeah.
Which is great, because I love this conversation.
I don't know if it's good or if it means I just want to hear my own voice too much, but really, I could have this conversation for hours.
Yeah. Well,
there's so much interesting, juicy, important things that we bump into and learn about in recovery through being a part of the world and learning more about ourselves, etc. That's worth talking about.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you making the trek down here. And,
yeah, for sure. My pleasure. Thanks for asking me. I was sort of stunned, but I'm happy to do it. Obviously, I enjoy talking about this stuff, so thank you very much for inviting me to do so.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it.